right, let's go ahead and get started on our very first reading. This week 1, we're going to be reading the very first story, which is Peter Rabbit. So the very first thing you'll notice I did was I took it out of its box, I took the jacket off, and then of course all that's left is the book, which is easier if my son wants to hold the book, or if something happens, it's just a little easier. The other nice thing about taking the jacket off the book is my son really enjoys looking at these maps. So for today, we are taking a look at Peter Rabbit, and we are also taking a look at Mr. McGregor's garden. So those will be the two places that you're going to talk about with your child. If your child is ready and is interested in maps, this is also a really good time to point out the compass. So in talking about the compass, you can talk about Peter Rabbit's family lives in the east, whereas Mr. McGregor's garden is in the west. And you can even say the northwest if you feel like your child is ready for that. But of course, all of this should be based on where your child is. Now, as far as reading these stories, we read them 3 times within the week. The first time I read the story just directly through, we look at the pictures, but mostly it's just my son having a look at the story, and then afterwards I do ask him to tell me what he remembers from the story. During that time, I let him go ahead and take a look at the pictures if he's having trouble remembering, but that's about all that we do on the first day. The second day is where we start some comprehension questions. So let's get started with looking at how do you do comprehension questions if you're new to homeschooling and you're not really sure what kind of things you could ask about when reading a story. Now remember, this is on the second reading, so it's okay if you are pausing throughout the story and talking about the different components. So on the very first page, we do notice some things about the rabbit family. One of the things that I like to point out is who are the members of the family. So we see that there are 4 children, and we see that there is a mother. For this story, you might ask your child to count the bunnies, both in this picture. This picture actually has not quite the right number of bunnies, so you can ask who they think might be missing, just as a general question. And then as well as you might ask a question about who do you think the characters are. So having them identify that these are Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and of course Peter is the one being a bit standoffish here. In our family, we like to address things directly head on. Right here on the third page, you have your father having an accident and being put into a pie by Mr. McGregor. So we know that originally this was a family of 6, and then unfortunately their father was baked into a pie. Now, how far you want to go with this is up to you. You might skip over this entirely if you have an especially sensitive child and simply ask a question like, oh, look, a pie. What's your favorite pie? Do you like pie? What's your favorite dessert? That sort of question. If you would like to address this more head-on, you could refer to a family that you know in your life that perhaps is maybe like a single mom with children. So you could address that very head-on, very directly. As a project, if you're interested in doing a project around the pie, I know a lot of people enjoy Kitchen Classroom. There's always the joy of baking a pie with your child. And if you want to be a little bit morbid about it, it is fun to take some of the no-bake pie crusts and the horrible Peeps bunnies that come out around Easter and stick them all in the microwave. And you can be rather morbid about this part of the story if you would like. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next set of 3. In the next set of 3, I like to point out the clothing choices in this. One of the big components is making sure that we know what people are wearing. So what is it that you see the different bunnies wearing within this? What kinds of things is our old Miss Rabbit wearing? What is she carrying? And then, of course, we see, oh no, the bunnies are in a bit of a state of undress. What has happened to their clothing? And so you can talk about how they've been piled to the side. Now, of course, all of this should be prompted to your child, so you would directly ask your child, oh, what's the bunny family wearing? Oh, what is Miss Rabbit wearing when she goes out? And look at the differences between the pictures. And what has happened to their clothing in this particular picture? So I like to focus on clothing in this particular one. You can also call attention to the baker if you would like to focus on that job for this week. In our family, we're going to focus on farmers, as Mr. McGregor is a farmer, but you could do baker instead. All right, let's go ahead and take a look further on. In this one, I don't focus too much on this. As you see, there isn't a lot of content, except where does Peter go? Should he be there? Oh, Peter is naughty. And then, of course, in this one, simply, he's eating some vegetables. You could simply prompt your child about what sorts of vegetables that they like to eat. All right. On this next page, you see that he has given himself a stomach ache. So here might be a good time to ask your child to give Peter some advice. What happens when we have a stomach ache? What do we do about having a stomach ache? And then we see Mr. McGregor enter the picture. And this is the part where usually we get some physical activity, as there's a lot of running, at our house at least. So this is usually the point where my son tends to want to reenact parts of it as we are reading. So I'll simply ask him physical questions of what happens now, what's the action then after that. So he can both look at the pictures as well as follow along in the story. So the next set of three, we see that Peter is again drawn back to the clothes. What does he lose first? What does he lose second? And oh no, what has happened to Peter? He is upside down. All right, this is a rather long story to do as a video, I apologize. But you see that some things have happened to Peter. You might do some counting here if you'd like to sort of skip over some of the depression bit of this. As you see that Peter is feeling very sad for himself and is basically ready to give up and die. If you'd like to skip over that, you can, or you can talk about it in perhaps a different way of what do we do when we feel sad. Maybe who are some people that help us feel better if you want to do any of that. Or you can simply skip it by counting the birds. This is a really good activity. Oh no, Peter has jumped into the watering can. What happens in the watering can? And of course the prompt you're looking for is about him getting wet. All right, so then we see Mr. McGregor looking around. What's something that you have been searching for? In the next one, this is usually more running in my house. So this would be another running page where I ask, what happens next? Why does Mr. McGregor give up? They're all good questions, because he was tired, of course, being the answer. All right, so we see then some prediction questions. So Peter has been sitting in the watering can, and of course he's very wet, and he's lost his clothes. What do we think is going to happen next? And remember, you've already read this on the previous day or the day before, and so your child should already be aware that he is going to get sick. So this would be a good way to make sure that your child has some recall as far as that. And then you can talk about some of the other characters that he meets. So who does he meet at the door? He meets a mouse. Who does he meet at the pond? And does he actually talk to this character, and why not? And so see what your child knows as far as relationships between cats and rabbits. Whatever they say is fine. You'll get a variety of answers, from a very direct answer of the cat wants to eat the rabbit, all the way down to something like, oh, maybe the cat is very busy and he doesn't want to disturb him. So just be prepared for whatever your child might say here. All right, so we are coming towards the end, I promise. So we do have, in the next part, we have some more action shots of trying to get out, because we still haven't figured out how to get out of the garden. what would you do sort of questions, or simply go towards the action acting part. Usually by this point, if your child is starting to look a little worn because the story is very long for sort of a child who's never read a story of this length, if you're not used to reading stories of this length to your child, this is a really good time to revert to easy questions like what colors do you see in the picture? How many birds are there? Is he going over the fence or under the fence? So think about asking some very simplistic questions here if your child is looking a little bit worn with the length of the story. However, it is important to try and continue if you can, because we are almost to the end. So we see what happens to Peter's clothes. What does he build? And make sure you prompt for the word scarecrow. Well, what's the point of the scarecrow? Do the crows in the picture look scared? And then, of course, whatever answer your child gives will be completely fine. So then, of course, we see Peter's mother in this one. How do you think that mommy or daddy would react if this were you? And then, of course, we get to our final set of pages. What is it that she makes to help him feel better? What is something that you do to feel better? So he has some chamomile tea. What's something that you might do to feel better? The little bunnies at the end are rewarded for not going to Mr. McGregor's garden, that they did what they were supposed to do. So what is something you like to get as a reward? And I know a lot of families like to do sticker charts or little snacks or whatever. So whatever it is you do in your house, that might be a good time to reference that. Whatever your sort of positive reinforcement is that you do within your house, you could talk about it in relationship to the bread, milk, and the blackberries. Other than that, I would go ahead and make sure that you stop right there. And on the third day, this is usually the part that people are confused by. Read through the story again. Don't really ask any prompting questions unless your child is asking the prompting questions. Then you can stop and discuss it, but try and read it through. And then on that third and final day, you should instead be asking your child to reenact it roughly from memory. That will not be an exact thing, but do try and ask them what is it that they remember from the story. And be very loose about it. If they leave off details in different parts of the story, you're really just seeing what they remember from the story. And if there's a part of the story that they remember that surprises you, perhaps some sort of detail like, old Mrs. Rabbit was going to pick up 5 buns. Well, that's clearly something that really stood out in your child's mind. So if they choose to reenact a small detail like that, that might be a really good clue to you that there's a level of interest there in that specific component. So I'm going to try and put these out on Sunday, kind of going through each of the stories. I'll try and put these out on Sunday so that if you do start on Monday, you will be able to have an idea of what kind of comprehension questions you might ask. Of course, you can ask any sort of comprehension question that you would like. These are just some rough ideas if you have never asked comprehension questions before. And I will see you in the next video.